Hello, we are going to look at when we should use commas in sentences to break up information. After today's lesson, we will know when we should use commas and where to put them in sentences. When it comes to commas, there are many different rules that should be followed to make sure you put them in the correct place. Let's take a look at the rules for when to use commas. The first rule to know where to place commas is in a sentence that is listing items. When you put a comma, it goes after the first item in the list and between all other items until the conjunction. So in this sentence, I need to buy bread, apples, and bananas. I placed a comma after bread because it is the first item in the list. I also put a comma after apples because it is an item in the list and it comes before the conjunction. So remember, rule number 1 is that we place commas in sentences that are listing items. Now let's take a look at the second rule for using commas. The second rule for using commas correctly is that you use a comma to introduce or end a quotation. So in the sentence, I really enjoyed the movie, said John. I have a comma after movie because it is ending the quotation. In the sentence, Terry replied, I hated it. I place the comma after replied because I am introducing a quotation. So right after the comma, the quotation starts, so I had to put a comma after reply. So remember to use commas when introducing and ending a quotation. The third rule for using commas in sentences is that you put a comma to separate introductory information from the rest of the sentence. So in the sentence, after I finish my homework, I am going outside to play. I place a comma after homework. This is because I am introducing what I'm going to be doing. So remember to place a comma to separate introductory information from the rest of the sentence. Now let's look at the fourth rule for using commas. The fourth rule for using commas correctly is to use a comma to separate a sentence transition from the rest of the sentence. In the sentence, first I'm going to watch TV, I placed a comma after first. This is because first is a transition word, so I have to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Then in the sentence, after that, I will do my chores. I placed a comma after that because after that is the transition word, so I need a comma. So remember to use commas to separate transition words from the rest of the sentence. The fifth rule for using commas is to use a comma to separate extra information. So in this sentence, John, our team leader, will be going over the directions. I placed a comma after John because this starts the extra information in the sentence. And then I placed a comma after leader because it's ending the extra information. Our team leader is considered extra information because if that was not in the sentence, we would still know what is happening. So remember to use commas to separate extra information in sentences. Now let's look at the sixth rule for using commas. The sixth rule for using commas is that you use a comma and a conjunction to separate two sentences. So in the sentence, I love the beauty of winter, but I absolutely despise snow. I placed a comma after winter and put a conjunction because these two sentences are both complete sentences. So since I want them as one sentence, I have to add a comma and a conjunction. So remember that if you have two separate sentences and want them to be one, you have to separate them by a comma and a conjunction. The seventh rule for using commas is to place a comma between a city and state, as well as between the day and year. So in the sentence, I visited Panama City Beach, Florida on March 19, 2014, I placed a comma after beach because this is the last word in the city's name. And then it says the state. So we have to separate them. Then I also put a comma after 19. This is because the date is the 19th and then it is followed by the year. So I have to separate the day from the year. So remember to use a comma to separate cities from states and days from years. Let's look at the last rule for using commas that we will look at today. The last rule for using commas is to separate two or more adjectives before a noun. So in the sentence, I really hate this hot, humid weather, I placed a comma after hot because hot and humid are both adjectives and the weather is the noun. So remember to use commas in sentences to separate two or more adjectives that are before a noun.